You know, we had a friend who was recently divorced. She had married a man named Joe Wright, and she didn't find out until after they were married that his middle name was Always. One of the things that you may want to do, and maybe you're already doing that here in this chapter, is to use the Family and Friends initiative that we have. People can sign up, members can sign up for a year for $25, which is half of the regular rate. And if you can get some young men into the organization and they're under 56, they can sign up again the next year. Afterward, though, if they're over 56, they need to pay the full rate of $50.
Under 56 is a young man?
That's a young man.
Look around.
I've only been in the organization for about 8 years, and when I joined, Roger Flick, who was the incoming president, said, "Wow, it's really great that you're joining up because we get some young blood in the organization." And I was already over 70. When Joe contacted me, he asked me to talk about the history of the Sons of Utah Pioneers. And I've scurried around to find that information because, frankly, I didn't know very much about the history to begin with. But in July of 1907, a group of descendants of pioneers decided that they were going to organize an association called the Sons and Daughters of the Pioneers. And Senator and Apostle Reed Smoot was involved in that, in leading the organization. At their first meeting that was held in Springville, they had President Joseph F. Smith speak. Well, in fact, this idea didn't go very far because the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers had already organized themselves in April of 1901, and they weren't about to dissolve that organization in order to get along with the men in Utah. It was led by Annie Hyde Taylor, who was a daughter of John Taylor. Well, when this organization didn't really do very much, in 1928, a group of people led by Walter Taylor and David Lovelace organized the George A. Smith chapter of the Sons of Utah Pioneers in Provo. And that was the only Sons of Utah Pioneers organization that existed until 1933. When Lawrence Epperson, who was a member of that organization, moved to Salt Lake City, and they organized a national organization. They wrote a constitution, adopted a number of bylaws, and if you look at the constitution of this first organization, it looks a whole lot, the ideals that they had, like the ideals that we have today. Lawrence Epperson served as president for 2 terms. Then in 1935, Nephi Morris, who was president of the Salt Lake Stake and also a Salt Lake businessman, became the president. And he led the first, what they called encampment at that time. We refer to them as national conventions. He set as a goal a 12-year program to organize a pioneer trek from Nauvoo to Salt Lake City, and he had others working with him. They wanted to do that in July of 1947, which was the centennial of the pioneers first coming into the valley. And one of the things that's interesting about this organization is that At first, it attracted not only Mormons, but others who were interested in the history of Utah. Herbert Auerbach, who many of you may remember was a businessman in Salt Lake City, a prominent Jewish leader, served as second vice president for a while, and he was also president of the Sons of Utah Pioneers. And he served on the board with George Albert Smith, who was at that time president of the church. One of the things that President Auerbach did was to donate a large collection of Joseph Smith memorabilia and papers to the LDS Church for the church museum, which was then housed on Temple Square. That collection now is part of the church history collection in the church museum. Well, by 1935, the SUP had 2,000 members and 69 what they called camps at that time. They used the term camps instead of chapters as we call them today, and I think they got that term from the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers. Their local organizations are still called camps. My sister was president of one of those organizations down in California, and each of the camps was headed by a captain instead of a president. Well, in 1953, the SUP adopted a new constitution, and the constitution changed the name from camps to chapters, and the chief executive officer, the position that Joe holds, was changed from captain to president. And at that time, the official name of the organization was changed to the National Society of the Sons of Utah Pioneers, and that's the name that it continues to hold at the present time. During these early years, the SUP had a newsletter that they called SUP News. Then in 1937, Judge George Goetz changed the name of the newsletter to the Pioneer. And that name continued to be the name of the newsletter until 1893, when President Angus Belliston decided that what the association really needed was a magazine that had interesting articles, that were readable articles, that was a well-illustrated magazine that members could receive. And at that time, the name Pioneer then was adopted for our current journal. And that has continued as a quarterly magazine until the present time. Well, for 13 years after 1893, the Sons of Utah Pioneers didn't have a newsletter. News appeared in the Pioneer magazine in small articles. And then in 2006, Grant Barton, who was serving as president that year, began publishing a monthly newsletter, The Trail Marker. Now, I assume all of you get that. Joe probably sends it out by email to everybody, or slow mail to those that don't use email. And you are what my kids call snail mail now. The organization passed through extremely difficult times during the Great Depression of the 1930s, and some of you will remember that. I can tell by looking at a number of you that you probably remember the Great Depression, and through the World War II period. But nevertheless, members continued to undertake a number of significant projects. The Salt Lake Pioneer Luncheon Club was organized during this period, and it carried on where the organization was not really doing very much. This organization, the Luncheon Club, was later renamed the Salt Lake Pioneer Chapter, and in 1967, the Salt Lake Pioneer Chapter began holding the sunrise service that takes place on the 24th of July. That has continued down to the present time, and we encourage all of you to participate in that. It starts at 7 o'clock, which is kind of early on a vacation day for everybody to get up, but you're all welcome to participate, and there's no charge. It's held in the Salt Lake Tabernacle. Well, in 1946, Wendell Ashton, who was publisher of the Deseret News and director of public communications for the church, became president of the organization. And what he did was to continue the plans that Nephi Morris had started for that trek that was to go from Nauvoo back to Salt Lake City. And you may have seen some pictures of those cars that they use. And what they did was to do a cardboard cutout of a picture of an ox and then apply it to the side of the cars and drive then all the way from Nauvoo to Salt Lake City. They must have caused a big stir for highway patrols through all the states that they passed through with cars that looked like that. And the SUP then cooperated with a number of other organizations to construct the This Is the Place monument at the mouth of Ensign Canyon, or Immigration Canyon, I should say. The Centennial Committee hired Mahanrai M. Young, who was a grandson of Brigham Young, and was a noted sculptor nationally. His works are in a number of places in the East. He lived most of his life in New York. He was hired to design and do the sculptor work for the This Is the Place monument. And Wendell Ashton, as president, also started an article in the Deseret News called Know Your Utah, which he wrote to help people in the state learn something about the history. Until 1947, all of the presidents of the Sons of Utah Pioneers had lived in Salt Lake City. In 47, though, Ruland Rainey of Ogden was elected president, and then his successor was Judge Jesse Rich, who lived in Logan. These two presidents inaugurated lifetime membership, something that the association had not had before. Any of you who've looked into a life membership know that you have to pay $500 for that now. Imagine paying $50. That's what you had to pay to be a life member in 1947 when it was first inaugurated. Many of you may not know that the Sons of Utah Pioneers inaugurated this Mormon Battalion organization, the commemorative Mormon Battalion organization that continues to exist today. Fred E. H. Curtis, who was president of the Sons of Utah Pioneers, was the first commanding officer, and the Mormon Battalion and Sons of Utah Pioneers have had a close relationship. If you go to this sunrise service, you'll note that the Mormon Battalion in uniform performs the flag ceremony there. Well, in 1950, President Curtis, who was leading the Mormon Battalion, organized a trek of the Mormon Battalion from Grand Canyon to San Diego, and from there to Fort Moore in Los Angeles. Fort Moore was constructed in Los Angeles in part by members of the Mormon Battalion. In 1953, Richard Lambert, who was the SUP president, represented both the Sons of Utah Pioneers and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at the dedication of the Mormon Memorial Bridge, which crossed the Missouri River at Omaha. The bridge was designed to commemorate the trek of Mormons from Council Bluffs and from Florence, Nebraska to Utah. His successor in 1953 was Nicholas G. Morgan, and he was particularly interested in establishing new monuments for the state of Utah. He established a monument in downtown Salt Lake City to celebrate the completion of the Transcontinental Telegraph. We talk a lot about the Transcontinental Railroad, but the Transcontinental Telegraph was joined here in Utah in 1861, and it was an extremely important event. If you go to the state capitol building today, you'll see monuments to Daniel Jackling, who was a non-Mormon but who was involved in the development of Kennecott Copper Corporation, Thomas L. Kane, whose name will be familiar to all of you, who was important in Mormon history, Eliza R. Snow, who wrote so many poems and was married both to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, and Carl G. Mazur, noted educator who helped to develop Brigham Young University. Well, there are monuments to all of those in the state capitol, and Nicholas Morgan of the Sons of Utah Pioneers was responsible for establishing those. He also helped to establish a monument to Abraham Lincoln at New Salem, Illinois, which was the town where Lincoln lived in Illinois while he was a young man. And a monument also to Lycurgus, the Greek lawgiver, which was established in Sparta. Now, I understand that that monument's not in very good condition, and I'm not certain how the Sons of Utah Pioneers is going to get over to Sparta to help renew that monument. Well, you remember I said that membership declined during the Great Depression and during World War II. Well, it also declined during the Korean War. In 1954, there were only 11 active chapters. We have 41 chapters now. We just had a new chapter organized in Modesto, California. So we've had chapters in California before, but this is the first one in recent years that's been organized in California. Well, by the end of Horace Sorensen's term as president, and in 1957, there were 30 chapters. He did a lot of work in building up new chapters for the organization. And in 1953, Horace Sorensen and his wife opened what was called the Pioneer Memorial Museum. It was located on Connor Street in the southwest section of Salt Lake City. And interestingly, the Sons of Utah Pioneers had its headquarters at that same place where the Pioneer Museum was located. Then the Sons decided, they negotiated with Lagoon to move some of the artifacts from the Pioneer Museum to Lagoon. And then 8 years later, in 1875, the Sons of Utah Pioneers agreed to sell the Pioneer Village to Lagoon, and they got $285,000 for that. Well, at the same time, Horace Sorensen decided he was going to sell the ground where the Pioneer Museum was located. And the office had to move. They moved for a while to a school that was nearby. And then, because they had this $285,000, that served as the basis for constructing the new building on Louise Avenue. And many of you, of course, have visited the national headquarters. Interestingly, when the new building was going to be constructed at first, it was going to be constructed just north of the DUP Museum on Capitol Hill, just down from the Capitol building. But one of the property owners who owned a house there refused to sell it to the state, and the state was not willing to use eminent domain to take the site. And so the Sons of Utah Pioneers then had to find a different place for the national headquarters, and we found the place where the headquarters are located now.
That was donated by the church.
Pardon me?
That was donated to us by the church.
Donated by the church.
Oh,
Property.
the property was.
Yes. They offered us 9 sites, and that's the one we chose.
We were fortunate to get that site. The Sons of Utah Pioneers are able to rent the site to various organizations, and it helps to contribute to us for maintaining the national organization. We're doing very well with that. Well, during the 1950s and 1960s, the SUP worked very closely with the Mormon Battalion to organize and promote monuments. One of the monuments that we constructed was to Philip St. George Cook. You may recognize his name because he was the commander of the Mormon Battalion, and he was with the United States Army that came into Utah. He was buried in Detroit, and there's a grave marker in Detroit that the Sons of Utah Pioneers established. President J. Rowland Morgan served as Grand Master of the parade in California when the Sons of Utah Pioneers helped to establish a site at Sutter's Fort where gold was discovered in California. And under the leadership of Eugene Watkins in 1969, the SUP contributed more than $19,000 for the construction of the Mormon Battalion Monument at Presidio Park in San Diego. We were given a challenge to raise $18,000, and we exceeded the amount that we were asked to donate by $1,000. At the dedication of the monument in November of 1969, President Hugh B. Brown of the First Presidency offered the dedicatory prayer, and Elder Mark Peterson of the Quorum of 12 Apostles offered the invocation. In 1971, the Sons of Utah Pioneers, under President Verl Dixon, dedicated a monument at the Mormon Workers' Cabin at the gold discovery site at Coloma, which is near Sacramento. Many of you know that a group of Mormon Battalion soldiers left after they were mustered out. They came north to Sacramento to work for John Sutter, and they were at Coloma when the gold was discovered. That, of course, was inaugurated the gold rush of 1849 that really built California. At the dedication of the LDS Visitors Center at San Diego, the Sons of Utah Pioneers contributed to that, and SUP President Orson Wright dedicated or offered the benediction. President Harold B. Lee offered the dedicatory prayer. The Mormon Battalion served as an honor guard at the dedication. In 1972, the Sons of Utah Pioneers raised $25,000 for a monument at Brigham Young's gravesite on First Avenue. I don't know how many of you have visited that site. It took 3 years to get that much money, but the SUP actually oversubscribed there as well. They collected $27,000. The monument's entitled All Is Well, and the sculptor of the monument was the famed Utah sculptor, Edward Frotton. At the dedication of the monument, in which the Sons of Utah Pioneers participated, President N. Eldon Tanner of the LDS Church, his first presidency, offered the dedicatory prayer. Governor Calvin Rampton was there, and SUP President Orson Wright was also there. The Tabernacle Choir provided the music for the service. So the Sons of Utah Pioneers have contributed a great deal throughout the West and in other areas for the construction of monuments. We were fortunate to have that $285,000 for the construction of the headquarters. It was really a great thing for the Sons of Utah Pioneers. We had to raise more money, and so the Sons inaugurated the system of memorializing ancestors. And from the money for those memorializations, the church was, or the organization was able to contribute more for the construction of that building. In the mid-1980s, the Sons of Utah Pioneers established a financial advisory committee to advise the Executive Council and the Board on financial functions, and that financial advisory committee still continues to exist. Under the leadership of Horace and Ethel Sorensen, prominent SUP members, the SUP constructed a railroad museum at Corinne, and they wanted to use the museum and run the trains that were in the museum in movies and other things, but there weren't the facilities at Corinne to do that, and so they donated the Railroad Museum to Heber to establish a railroad museum near the Heber Creeper station. Now, I don't know how many of you have been up to see that, but the museum itself was donated by the Sons of Utah Pioneers. The donation of that museum was valued at $3 million to the Heber Creeper, or I think they call it the Heber Valley Historic Railroad. We always still call it Heber Creeper in Provo. At times, the Sons of Utah Pioneers have faced legal challenges. In 1987, Salt Lake County levied a tax on the property of $18,000. It took some time and a great deal of finagling by SUP President Everett H. Call to get the county to recognize that the SUP was a nonprofit organization and that it really should not have had to pay those taxes. Well, in 1989, the SUP organized the Grandsons organization. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but the term grandson doesn't mean that they were grandsons of pioneers. It meant that they donated $1,000 and they set up a trust fund that was to be used for ancestral research and for other things that the Sons of Utah Pioneers wanted to do. In 2000, there were $35,000 in the trust fund, so it meant that the Grandsons organization had 35 members. During the early years of the Sons of Utah Pioneers, most of the awards that were given, honorary memberships, were given to presidents of the LDS Church. In 1990, however, the Sons began designating modern pioneers, people who were contributing now to the development of the state. President Angus Belliston in 1993 formalized this, and some of the early people who were noted as modern pioneers included Marisa Bravanel, who was for a long time the director of the Utah Symphony, John Huntsman Sr., a prominent businessman with whom most of you are familiar, or at least whose name you know. In addition to this, it was Angus Belliston who promoted a number of other initiatives. One of these was the Brigham Young statue in the state capitol rotunda. I don't know how many of you have been up there. It's kind of an interesting statue because it shows Brigham Young standing up, walking forward, instead of sitting down the way the statue in the Capitol Rotunda shows him. It's a larger-than-life size statue. It cost $150,000 to make, and of course the Sons didn't contribute all of that, but we participated in it. President Elliott Cameron worked closely in the commemoration of the centennial of Utah statehood, and the Sons of Utah Pioneers were involved in that, and in the sesquicentennial the next year in 1997 of the Trek of Pioneers to Utah. There were a number of Sons who participated in the wagon train that came from Nauvoo and came to Utah. Well, a number of other things have taken place since 2000. President Booth Maycock, who served in 2008, promoted the establishment of the Eyes West Monument. If you go up to this is the Place Heritage Park, you'll see that monument outside that show Joseph Smith and Brigham Young standing by one another looking toward the west. And there's a duplicate of that monument that was erected in Nauvoo near the site next to the river where the Saints began crossing. In 2011, the National Building experienced a really devastating flood. The sewer backed up and it poured sewage into the basement, destroying a number of things. Lamar Adams was president that year and he wasn't too happy about what happened. Fortunately, he was able to get some recompense from the insurance company, but then the insurance company canceled our insurance and we had to find more insurance from another company after they did that. The cleanup and the restoration of the building were quite expensive, and of course by this time the building was getting somewhat older, so Dick Christiansen, who was president in 2012, inaugurated a legacy fund. Many of you probably contributed to that legacy fund, and by doing so we were able to set up a fund of $50,000 that helped in the rebuilding and repairing of the building. There were a lot of things that simply had gone on from one administration to another, had not been repaired, that ought to have been repaired. The building's now in excellent shape, and numerous organizations use the Sons of Utah Pioneers building for various activities. Over time then, the Sons of Utah Pioneers have sought to put into practice our mission statement. Our mission is to come to know our fathers and turn our hearts to them, to preserve the memory and heritage of the early pioneers of the Utah Territory in the western United States, and to honor present-day pioneers worldwide who exemplify the same qualities of character. Then, fourth, to teach these same qualities to the youth who will be tomorrow's pioneers. We honor the pioneers for their faith in God, devotion to family, loyalty to church and country, for their hard work in serving others, their courage in adversity, their personal integrity, and their unyielding determination. Thank you.